Welcome to the May Day edition of Rink Rap right here on Forever Blueshirts. I'm Jim Cerny, joined today by Mollie Walker of the New York Post. Mollie, thanks for a few minutes.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me, as always.
So we have to emphasize May Day because, yeah, it's May 1st, but May Day is also the universal distress signal, as you probably are very well aware of. And May Day pretty much has been ringing true around the Garden and MSG Training Center for about the past 6-7 months. So I definitely want to spin forward and see what's next with the Rangers and discuss that. But I don't think we can look forward until we look back again. And I know you have spent countless hours, a lot of breath, a lot of typing, a lot of words on this.
A lot of words.
A lot of words. I can't get past, and you're going to help me right here. I can't get past that. As much as I understand this team being upset about Barclay, Goodrow, and Jacob Trouba, and how Chris Drury, you can say mishandled it, certainly didn't handle it smoothly, either situation, that submarined a season for a roster that's, on paper, good. So what, getting down to the core, what was the problem this season with this team?
I think, well, first of all, that's such a loaded question.
Yeah.
And I think that the Goodrow Trouba stuff in the offseason was really only a layer to the season as a whole. I think the fact that it happened in the offseason before anybody even got back into the locker room, and then one of those two players was allowed to walk back into the locker room under the circumstances that he was, kind of got the whole season off on the wrong foot to begin with. So I wouldn't necessarily boil it entirely down to that offseason and those two offseason circumstances, but they certainly had a major effect. And I think the fact that it happened at the very beginning just kind of got the vibes and everything off to the wrong start from the very beginning. And clearly, as we saw from this team, they let it engulf the locker room. They let it engulf their minds. And it just took on a life of its own, I think, and only sunk them. It was a weight that they carried around from the very, very beginning of the season, that everything else that seemed to happen just kept sinking the ship further and further, that by November, it was completely sunk. So I think that kind of puts into perspective how much weight those two incidents at the beginning of the season had on the team. But like I said, loaded question, only a layer to, I think, what happened in its totality this season.
So, I think as we talk about this in general terms, I think a lot of times the face of this collapse, outside of Goodrow, Drury, Trouba, has been Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. I think they have worn this. I think it continued right through breakup day with everything that Mika had to say. And if you could address that, you're already agreeing. So if you could address that as part A of the question, but part B, where was a voice of Vinny Trocheck or a voice of Adam Fox? Like, did they just fall in line with from the outside? It looked like there's just this mopiness around Mika Zibanejad this season, right? Yeah. And that everybody just fell in line with it. I know that's oversimplifying, but where was that core leadership to kind of pull this group out of this mess?
Well, I think that Kreider and Mika wore this because this is their team. I think back to when Patrick Kane walked into the locker room and he said, this team was built on the backs of the Mika Zibanejads, the Chris Kreiders, the Jacob Troubas at the time, the Artemi Panarins. So it's their team. So of course they were going to wear this one. Mika's supposed to be the number one center. Chris Kreider is the longest tenured player on the team. Of course they were going to wear this one. In terms of needing a leadership voice, I think that, again, from the beginning, and Adam Fox even mentioned this on breakup day, Jacob Trouba coming back into the locker room and being completely open and honest about how difficult it was for him to have his heart in this and for him to lead this team coming from the offseason circumstances that he did. I think that's infectious. That's something that, is going to catch on. It's like wildfire, so I don't know if, again, obviously I'm not in there behind closed doors. So this is speculating. So I don't know if it was just kind of following suit, just because of the tone that was set from the very beginning of the season. And it was just kind of hard to get out of it at that point. But I think we did see Vincent Trocheck try to step up as a leader. I'll never forget that day when he called all the beat writers over to dispute a report that was coming out of Toronto that the whole team had a whole conversation about Chris Drury during their players-only meeting. So I think that Trocheck did try to take the necessary steps to throw his voice in the ring of leadership, sort of say. But like I said, I just feel like it was just hard for anybody to really grab what was going on into the locker room and stop it. There wasn't a voice that was able to speak out over the rest, I guess. But I'm sure it wasn't for a lack of trying. I don't think that they, just kind of said, oh, the season's, foregone conclusion. Why even bother? I didn't get that sense at all. I think it just became too big of a snowball for anybody to get in front of and stop. Like no human being would be able to get in front of that sort of inertia that they were headed at from the very, very beginning of the season. Truly, that's what it felt like, being in close proximity to it, so to say.
Yeah, which is a great explanation. The inertia, I know that's kind of like a gray explanation, but I don't think there is a black and white explanation here. So I think that's a great way to describe it. But it's just, again, you remove yourself and you see this team that was built on so much heart the year before. What made that team in 23-24 so likable was that they were never out of it. They believed
the resilient Rangers.
Right. There was so much swag about, we're down 2 in the third. We're coming back. Here, they were down 1 in the first, and you're like, all right, well, that's that.
I know. I'm such a believer in that X factor, that it feeling, whatever you want to call it, it's almost indescribable, intangible, just a feeling that a team has to it, that you just know that, that team could go and win the Stanley Cup. Like that's like, I thought about it in the Islanders in their back-to-back Eastern Conference finals, that missing ingredient of how ferociously you play for one another. It's the best thing about sports, I think, because that's something you just can never quantify. Doesn't matter. You want to talk all about the deficiencies on the ice, like how they actually stack up to other teams. Sure. Like that's all legit and valid, but sometimes you just can't quantify what a team is playing for, how they're playing for each other, that kind of camaraderie and the chemistry that a team can have. And the Rangers had it for quite some time. They had it. They had it even in the first round exit to the Devils. They still had it going into it. I mean, so this team had none of it. There was no sparkle. There was no magic. There was no fun. And that was so evident. So I'm such a big believer in that. And it was truly crazy to see a team that had so much of it go to having none of it in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, none. So take it back. Did the tide really start to change then when they were starting to get their teeth kicked in by Florida in the Eastern Conference Final, where, we can overcome everything. Oh, shoot. That team can overcome everything. Yeah. We can't.
No, I definitely think that conference final, they just ran into the better team. I mean, the Panthers were the best team that entire the Rangers, might have been, President's Trophy winners, but like all in all, that Panthers team, and they still are, it's such a great team, and they're so much harder to play, so much tougher. And anybody who was watching that series knew it was a freaking miracle that they were up 2-1 at any point, so it was definitely just a matter of running into the better team at that point. Had it been a different team and they went, and they played McDavid in the finals, who knows what would have happened. Truly. I think they probably would have had a better chance.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. So there was such a buy-in last season with Peter Laviolette, new coach and everything. Guy comes in, Stanley Cup ring, he's got a presence about him. I think we all expected that there would be buy-in. There was major buy-in. But I mean, you and I, we spoke last year after the playoffs, and we were like, yeah, but boy, there are a lot of things masked, along the way here. And part of it was for all the reasons that you just explained.
Mm-hmm.
So what I thought there was a regression was inevitable this season.
Yeah.
But a total non-lack of buy-in, I don't know how
I know what you mean. I know what you
negatives. I just threw into that one there, but not my best English right there.
Yeah.
But you get the point. Again, I know part of that has to do with the Trouba situation, everything you talked about earlier, and maybe there was inevitability that there was going to be a regression, but just the egregious mistakes over and over, not covering the middle of the ice. I mean, my gosh, game after game after game after game, losing puck battles, which we really started to see in the second and third round last year, hurt them, losing those puck battles, the giveaways. Kiandre Miller, I'm just going to hand one over again to you,
I know.
So was this part and parcel of everything that was going on? Does this land at the feet of Peter Laviolette? Obviously he's been fired already, but kind of your thoughts about that. And then also Peter being removed as head coach.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you can trace the buy-in difference back to all the outside noise that did engulf the room this season. I think that made it difficult to commit to it, I guess, for the players. Again, speculating from the outside looking in. In terms of the system, that was pretty crazy and weird to see because, something that was a knock on Laviolette when he was coming in was there was a lot of knock on his defensive system, and a lot of people that I had spoken to had said that sometimes they had watched Peter Laviolette's team playing in the defensive zone and just had absolutely no idea what they're trying to accomplish. But it was, I don't know if it was an execution thing or a confusion thing, or again, with the buy-in also factoring into that, it just didn't make for a good recipe. And he plays that man-to-man, which the Rangers aren't really exactly built for that, so to say. But I think the defensive structure and just the lapses, the wide open space, and the middle of the Rangers zone was anybody's for the taking, but again, I do trace a lot of that back to the buy-in, but I do think that part of it is also clearly some confusion in the defensive system and not really knowing exactly what they're trying to accomplish, because it just was never executed very well. They were one of, if not the worst defensive team in the league this season. Right. Truthfully, it was, they just seemed to be so easy to play against in that manner. It was so evident on a nightly basis. It truly was. Look, I think that Laviolette had to go just because, and I wrote a column about this, like the whole season was just so toxic. Not saying that it was Laviolette, because I wouldn't, but the whole season was so toxic. I just felt like you had to leave as much of it in the past as humanly possible. And that's players, staff included, Yeah. So I think that it was something that needed to be done, just because how can you bring in the same guy who oversaw this crazy collapse? But at the same time, and I've wrote this before too, I felt like Laviolette was also kind of given a losing hand this season as well with the players, and just the way that they performed and the way that this season unfolded for things that he had no control over. He's obviously not Chris Drury. So I don't, if you're splitting this blame up into percentages, I don't feel that a bulk of it falls at the feet of Laviolette. I really don't. I just think it was something that had to happen, just because you could not take a lot of this season moving forward. You got to leave it in the past, unfortunately.
Right. Which allows us to spin a little bit forward here. And Mike Sullivan's free.
Yes, he is.
Chris Drury woke up and realized that his dream could become a reality.
Yes.
But I thought you did a great job. And I've written some of these things as well. But, I thought you and Larry as well wrote similar things saying, yep, Chris, he's probably going to be the number one right now. However, there is no perfect coaching candidate out there. And you kind of laid out some of the reasons. So I know that I'm kind of like setting it up here, but I know that, you said, yes, I understand he's the number one target. If you're running this team, would he be the number one target? I know he's Chris Drury's number one target. Yeah. Would he be yours? If not, tell me why and tell me who. Who would you like to see run this team?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if Chris Drury meant what he said when he said that he is simply looking for the right fit, it is not about how many years they have in the league. It could be a first-time guy, could be a woman. Like, seriously.
Yep.
And if he meant what he said when he said that, then, like I wrote in that column, there should be no foregone conclusions. He should be doing the interview process just like everybody else, and him becoming available shouldn't diminish other candidates. I know that, some coaches are better at interviewing than others. That's kind of a well-known thing, but like, I'm wanting to speak to Sullivan and see what his thoughts are and things like that. Like I can't give you a candidate, sitting here right now, because if I were in Chris Drury's shoes, I would want to be speaking, in depth and hearing what everybody has to say about how they would fix this team, after what just happened. And also you got to find, not that I don't think Sullivan is, a guy that would jump into this head first, because he just strikes me as a guy that would absolutely. But this is, I know it's New York and, everybody would always want this job, but this is a pretty daunting task to be taking on right now with a lot of pressure. They're in this weird area now. Are they going to contend? Are they not? I think that Chris Drury needs to get on the same page with a head coach, what the plan is, what the timeline is. All of those things need to be taken into consideration. But I'll tell you, from a media standpoint, I would not mind Mike Sullivan. I very much so enjoyed him at Four Nations. He was great.
Yeah.
In terms of to deal with, just an absolute professional. And at the same time, take this as you will, though, I see a lot of similarities with Peter Laviolette. Veteran guys who have been around the block, who have seen it all, seemingly. Peter Laviolette surely has after this season. But I do see a lot of similarities between the two. And that's what made me draw that conclusion is, they've done the retreat route twice in 4 years. It hasn't worked between him and Gerard Gallant. So I do think that things need to be weighed accordingly. But if you're looking at the pool of candidates right now, yes, Mike Sullivan is far and away the most qualified guy for the position. But you know what? So was Peter Laviolette at the time. So it's just kind of like, do you want to get some fresh blood in here? Somebody with different ideas, somebody who sees things a little bit differently. That's there's no big three in New York, Sullivan's used to having a leader like Sidney Crosby, and they don't have that right now. We don't know who that is. We don't know who it's going to be, if it is going to be anybody in that room. So it's kind of like, it's just, I'm very curious to see what happens, because I think it will be interesting if Chris Drury does end up hiring Mike Sullivan literally by the end of the week, if or something. I think it would say a lot. I just think it would say a lot about how he values and views Mike Sullivan. And, we all know that he's gonna have another job soon, whether it's in New York or elsewhere. But, I just think it would say a lot if he does automatically hire Sullivan. But I also think it would say a lot if he doesn't. And he is keeping his, and it is, and they hired Peter Laviolette after 11 weeks. So that's a really long coaching search.
Yeah.
And, he's got to get this right. This next one's got to be right, so it's why would anything be a foregone conclusion? That's my biggest point.
Yeah, and since, obviously Drury's name, coaching search, his name's going to come up a lot here. Yeah. Since you mentioned his name over and over, just a quick thought from you on how the New York Rangers, who never, I mean, listen, I've worked for this team. Yeah. I covered this team for, 30 years or whatever. They never, certainly in the Dolan era, they never publicize, Glenn Sather got a contract extension, right? Mm-hmm. You only hear when somebody's been fired. Right. Mm-hmm. Really? In fact, that's it. That's the only time you hear about these things. Right. And here, coincidentally, right after breakup day, after Mika especially, but others have their say so, who gets the final word? And that's James Dolan, putting it out there, the lengthy quote and everything, throwing all his support behind Chris Drury. So I know it's a big buildup, and I know that I'm just teeing you up here, but that wasn't just happenstance, was it?
No, obviously not. I think it was a very calculated decision to do that for obvious reasons. It was Dolan telling everybody who's in charge and who will be in charge for the foreseeable future. But again, this was not a surprise at all, I don't think. I think it's a pretty widely known fact that Drury still has very high favor with ownership. So it wasn't a surprise at all. And that's exactly what it was. It was a message that this is the guy and he's our guy for the foreseeable future. So get behind it or get out. That's exactly what's between the lines there. So not surprising at all.
So the other day I wrote a story and I said, here's laying it out. Here's what Chris Drury's, here are the 5 next things he's got to deal with. And it's obvious. He's got to hire a coach. He's got to make the decision on this year's first round draft pick, et cetera. But for me, the number one thing was, along with, and to me, it's 1 and 1A, going with hiring a coach. And part of it is where the coach stands or the new coach will stand on this. You got to sit down and clear the air with Zibanejad.
Yeah.
I think you need to know. Are you in? Right. Or is this whole mopiness, the mopey Mika, as I call him, is that going to carry over? Because if it is, we got to get you to sign off on a trade somewhere. We got to ship you out. Yeah. So do you agree that is like a super high on the
priority
for Drury this offseason?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you start internal. After a season like this, you got to find out who wants to be here and who doesn't, who sees themselves in the long-term plans in New York and who doesn't. I think that Mika actually told our general assignment reporter, Andrew Crane, that he knows what's in his contract and, everybody agreed to it. He earned it. Yeah, it was a very pointed quote for sure. And so judging from that, it sounds like he plans to be here, but like you said, there have to be conversations about, him worrying about what management is doing and things like that, clearly. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens, and things could get uncomfortable, if they don't end up coming out of this seeing eye to eye. So, but it's Mika Zibanejad. I mean, this is a guy who was supposed to be their number 1 center. So, it's a really tough situation, and I just hope things don't get really ugly to the point, where what happened with Trouba, threatening to put him on waivers, you can't let it get back to that point. It just does. It's not received well. And it's just not a route that you want to continuously go down as well either. So I think this is learn from your mistakes. Do not let another disgruntled player walk back into that locker room. You got to everybody's got to be on the same page going into the season. It's got to be a blanket. Everybody's on the same page. Otherwise, it's going to be absolute calamity again.
Right. And so these moves, like, Goodrow, Trouba, stepping away from it, just, being the impartial observer, not how he handled it, but wouldn't call them master strokes, but these were moves that had to be made. I mean,
yeah, of course,
freed up almost $12 million in salary cap space with those two guys. So that said, that kind of leads into Chris Kreider. Is he a Ranger next season, or do they find a way to open up another $6.5 million in cap space?
All right. Well, it's another type of conversation. It's very similar to Mika Zibanejad. You know, do you want to be here? Do you not want to be here? Are you committed or are you not committed? I think that Chris Kreider has had such a long Rangers career. It would be really sad if this season was our lasting memory of number 20, especially. He obviously had a very tumultuous year. He rattled off all of his injuries at the end, which I feel like shed a lot of light on the way that his season went. You know, everybody likes to say, "Oh, it's an excuse," blah blah. But like, okay, he hurt his hand. Like, he literally, it sounds like he's gonna have surgery on his hand. He had vertigo at one point, for crying out loud. Like, he just, I mean, you could throw the trade memo in there too. And I know that what was going on with Mika also affected everybody around Mika as well. So no more than his best friend, you know, who had him as the best man in his wedding, for crying out loud. I mean, you know, these guys are human, you know, like, yeah, that's what the money's for, you know, tighten up. And I don't disagree, you know, I don't disagree with that at all. Cause the Mad Men quote, "That's what the money is for," is obviously very, very true and real. But that's still his best friend in the entire world, who was clearly going through something extremely tough mentally. And it's soul sucking to be around, you know, you can feel it yourself. So, yeah, I think that at the core, you need to find out if Chris Kreider wants to be here, you know, because obviously I feel like there's, going back to, you know, it's been widely reported about Jim Ramsey and his, you know, thoughts on that too. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that I feel like all of these points should be mentioned and spoken about in these meetings, I would hope to say. Like, I would hope that, you know, at this point, I mean, the fact that it's years later and we're still talking about Jim Ramsey, so I would hope that it has already been discussed, but if it hasn't, then it needs to, it just all needs to be smoothed over, I think. But I mean, it would be really sad if this was the last that we saw of Chris Kreider in a Rangers jersey.
And I agree. The big difference, of course, between Mika and Kreider, there are a lot of similarities, but it's not just what Chris Kreider wants. Like, if Chris Drury and the Rangers feel like it's time to move him, they can do it. It's only a 15-team trade, you know, trade. So, you know, Mika's actually got more leverage for sure than Kreider 100%. Does. But, you know, we'll see. Quick final one for you. I don't want to take up your entire day. You've dealt with this entire season already. You're trying to detox over there.
It's okay.
But I think the other, like, really big roster decision that Drury has right now in this offseason, other than, you know, adding pieces, maybe changing, you know, the look of the team and what have you, is Kiandre Miller. Like, he drives me crazy. Like, like, there are days where I say, of course you got to sign him long term, and then there are other times where, sometimes in the same game, where you go, oh my God, you can't throw $7 million to this guy over the next 7 years. You cannot afford to do that. So where do you think that all stands? It's either, you know, I hear people all the time say, "Oh, just give him a short-term deal. Let him keep proving himself. He's only 25. No. A short-term deal walks him into UFA status.
Exactly.
It's either commit to Kiandre Miller or not. At least in my book. That's more black and white to me. How do you see it?
Right. I don't know if it has to be as black and white. It depends on how much they value him. Obviously, it depends on where their value lies when they are thinking about Kiandre and their long-term plans or not. I think that he is such an interesting case. It's so apparent that his career hasn't gone the way that he's wanted it to. And I've written about this so many times.
Yeah.
I feel like so much of his confidence stems from his offensive contributions. And that has been a part of his game that has not come through nearly as consistently as he probably thought it would and or wants it to.
Well, it's consistently gone this way the last two
I
seasons.
know. Well, I mean, like the defensive stuff aside, which we can obviously get into in a second, but I think that so much of his mental confidence has stemmed from that, and because that hasn't gone the way that he thought it would, it has definitely hindered him a lot. The defensive mistakes are egregious, and there were so many of them this season that it would be a disservice to the organization for them not to consider, trying to get something for him. But it's going to come down to the way that they evaluate it, the way that they value, because he's always described as a unicorn to me, just because of his size and his athleticism and his reach. You can't teach that. You can never teach that, obviously. But I don't know. I mean, do you take – I feel like you do have to take the risk and see him in a different system with a different – but again, there's so many – they've seen him in how many different systems under how many different coaches at this point,
Right.
So it's, yeah, like I said, it'll come down to how they see his value.
Well, they be not only jury, but a new coach.
Right. Yes. 100% that too. I don't see it as black and white. I could see, maybe some sort of happy medium that doesn't take him straight to free agency, but, that isn't also committing super long term, and maybe dialing it at a reasonable price because of what we've seen, his track record. In terms of that, the leverage isn't that great. Right. But I mean, at the same time, defensemen like him who eat up 20 minutes a night don't grow on trees. So, you have to realistically evaluate, if you do want to trade him, you got to bring somebody back to fill it in,
Right. And I'd argue they already need another left shot D in the top four. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you trade Kiandre Miller, you need two.
They're so thin on D too. Yeah. I mean, the fact that Matthew Robertson got a qualifying offer last season is all you need to know, right. Of how thin they are back there, So, I mean, I was so thrilled for him that he finally got his debut. He obviously had been patiently waiting, but in the grand scheme of things, he never sniffed a real game with competition, so if you think about their defensive depth from that standpoint, how do they get rid of Kiandre? So it's there's so many different aspects to think about. But you got to identify who you're replacing him with before you let him go. First and foremost.
Right. And, and to get to that point. So like I said, I think they need a top four defenseman anyway, whether you re-sign Key and whether he plays with Fox or Borgen, mm-hmm. I think you still need that other guy. I don't think Susi's that guy. I don't think Vakanainen's that guy. Yeah. I don't think moving Schneider from right side to left side is that guy. Yeah. I think you need another top four.
Schneider might. Schneider could be a left side option. I think they really didn't mind
third
Schneider.
Pair righty is easier to get that.
Right. Yeah, I don't think they minded Schneider on the left. And I think that they're very high on Braden Schneider. So I could see that. And I think that they were pretty happy with his play on the left, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. Well, early in the season, I thought it was one of those things that I remember writing at the time. This checks a box for them, down the road. Definitely. Because it was pretty seamless,
Yeah. No, it was. That's Braden. Braden is built to adapt. That's what, I think I see online a lot of people give him a lot of flack saying, why are we so committed to a Braden Schneider? Braden Schneider will make lemonade out of any type of lemons that you give him, he can make it work. He really does. And think about how many defensive partners our guy has had in his very short time
Yeah.
in his NHL career. That's not easy, especially for a defenseman who's still learning and developing in the NHL level. To have a different partner during Gallant, it was like every other day. It was a different guy that he was skating with. So you gotta recognize that versatility is also of value.
Right. And obviously, if that's the thinking, then now you only need one left shot defenseman if you decide to trade Kiandre Miller. But then to do all that, you also need to free up cap space, because Will Cooley's going to get money if you keep Miller.
Yeah.
He's going to get money. It's almost all gone at that point. So then we circle back to, what do you just? I didn't mention Lafrenière and that disaster this season either. I can't tell you, and I'm sure you probably take a lot more abuse from our friends in social media, but how much abuse I get for having the nerve to question Alexis Lafrenière and where the hell did he disappear to this season? Have you looked at the underlying numbers? Yeah, I've looked at the underlying numbers, and I watched the game, and I watched him not back check, and I watched him not score goals, and I look at the underlying numbers. I do it all. And I'm like, it was not a good seat. It was a good seat, his bank account or his future bank account, getting that contract. So
yeah, no, it wasn't great.
It wasn't great at all. If you want to weigh in, I'll let you weigh in on one more.
No, you're so fun. Yeah. No, it wasn't great. And I wrote this in that column about leaving as much of this season in the past, that it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for Chris Drury to admit that he committed too soon to his first overall pick and maybe look to see what you could get for him, because it just hasn't been there. It just hasn't been there in a lot of different facets. And I think that you might want to get out as sooner rather than later, because it's been pretty unimpressive, to put it as nicely as I possibly can.
That's very polite. And
thank you. And this coming from someone who was so impressed with the Panarin, Trocheck, Lafrenière line last season. I mean, they were the best 5-on-5 line in the entire NHL. But where did that go?
Is that an on-ice thing, or is that another off-ice thing, where it's just a combination thereof?
I think we asked Trocheck about this actually on breakup day, why he felt like it didn't work this season after working so well last season. And he just kept coming back to, he basically just kept saying they showed up and expected it to all be the same for them, to just cruise on through. And after winning the President's Trophy, that it would just be, a formality to get to the playoffs,
Right.
And you can't just show up. You can never just show up. There's so much more to it than just showing up. So that was kind of his broader response to it. But I think that after they saw so much stability in the lineup last season, there was none of that this season as well. Right. There was none of it. So it never really was able to get to that point where it was beforehand. And yeah, after Alexis signed the extension, it just seemed like the gas turned off a little bit. And that was disappointing to see.
More than a little bit, to say the least, especially after what we saw in the playoffs, like that Florida series.
He was the freshest guy. He was the freshest guy. Yeah, he had the most energy. He was very effective. He was the only one that really looked like he could do something on the ice, honestly.
Right. One battle.
I don't know. It comes and goes. I don't know what it is. Look, every player can be streaky, but I don't know. It's not. I wouldn't call Alexis streaky. It's just not the word that I would use, because there was really only one or two streaks where it was
right. That's not streaky.
Yeah.
Mollie, listen, thank you so much. I know, like I said, here's the final question. I hit you with like 5 more.
It's okay.
It's really fun to just, shoot it back and forth. And I really appreciate your time and all you do in your coverage. You do I know everyone probably props you up, but you did a fantastic job. And
thank you. I appreciate it, Jim.